All right, we'll talk about Apollo. This is from St. Augustine's book. So what I'm about to read to you is was written during the fall of Rome. I don't know, 400s, 300, 400s AD. Whenever Rome fell to the Visigoths, when Rome was sacked, he wrote about it. And ultimately, so he wrote about it. He witnessed the fall of Rome and basically wrote the City of God. Now, I'm looking at where Apollo is, the Apollo's sun god, where he is in the book. So Augustine writes about Apollo. He writes, such a furious succession of wars, when it might have been quiet and safe, by following in the peaceful ways of Numa, of the statue of Apollo at Cuma, whose tears are supposed to have portended disaster to the Greeks, whom the god was unable to succor. Now, what that means is the Apollo didn't help the Greeks. He wasn't. He was helping Troy, and he was trying to protect Troy. He failed. Ultimately, Apollo failed to keep Troy from being sacked, whether he agreed to it and disappeared or he disappeared otherwise. It's the same thing. Okay, now I'm going to go to the next part in the book where it mentions Apollo. It's page 14. I'm on page 8. It's page 14 now. And now it says, concerning certain stars which the pagans have called by their names of the gods, concerning Apollo and Diana and the other select gods whom they would have to be parts of the world. That even Varro himself pronounced his own opinions regarding the gods ambiguous. Well, it's like it's the unimportant suddenly of Apollo in the presence of the world and the collective. Um, so it's suggesting Apollo could have been killed, and ultimately the god body Apollo was still, well, the spirit of Apollo, even though Apollo was killed, would still be in the people, and they'd still have a spirit. It would still be alive, but it wouldn't be a god body anymore. Okay, now I'm going to go to page 70. And ought prudent men to have entrusted the defense of Rome to these conquered gods. But it will be said, this was only the saying of Juno, who, like an angry woman, did not know what she was saying. What then says Enos himself? Enos, who is so often designated pious, does he not say, lo, Panthus escaped from death by flight, priest of Apollo on the height? His conquered gods with trembling hands he bears and shelters swift demands. So this is talking about Apollo being conquered, or his presence being utterly removed from being able to protect anything. I think it was when he was killed, so he was destroyed. Apollo died, is what he's talking about here. Is Apollo died? He was killed. He couldn't. He didn't save Troy from being conquered. Sorry, his glasses are. I broke them, so I only got one side. Um, Unfortunately, I'll get another pair soon. Okay, now let's see. 138. Although Lycurgus pretended that he was authorized by Apollo to give laws to the Lacedaemonians, the sensible Romans did not choose to believe this. So this is talking about Apollo's authority being established in Rome, but not taken as serious, because since he was dead, in the collective, it's less important. Meaning, if you've got the God in the collective, it's still alive in the collective, in the spirit of men, even in women. But if the god Apollo got killed, then ultimately his authority was utterly removed, which means that the Romans would feel that it's not legitimate anymore, or he's dead, or we have him only now. It's just us that has the god. The god is dead, though. And now let's go to page 165. Conquered, taken, and destroyed by the Greeks, though it esteemed and worshipped the same gods as they. Priam, some answer paid the penalty of the perjury of his father, Lamedon. Then it is true that Lamedon hired Apollo and Neptune as his workmen, for the story goes that he promised them wages and then broke his bargain. I wonder that famous diviner Apollo toiled at so huge a work and never suspected Lamedon was going to cheat him from his pay. And Neptune to his uncle, brother of Jupiter, king of the sea, it really was not seemingly that he should be ignorant of what was to happen, for he is introduced by Homer. Now, what this means here is the Priam's father, Lamedon, I can't pronounce it. It's Laomedon, Lamedon. Lamedon was the father of Priam, and he was a man that talked to the gods and was among the gods, but he was a mortal king. He was the king of Troy. and he met Hercules. Ultimately, Hercules killed him. So Laomedon, who's the father of Priam, the king of Troy, Priam is the son of Laomedon. Hercules killed all of the sons of Troy and left two of them alive. One of them was Priam, and the other one was his brother Tithys, something that starts with a T. So two of the sons of the king of Troy, Laomedon, was the father of Priam. Two of them, one of them, Priam himself, was saved by the goddess Eos and taken off to be instructed and raised. So Priam was raised by the divine goddesses, and ultimately they actually took Priam under their wing. Then he became king of Troy, and that's what Priam was so special about. He knew the gods and goddesses. He was among them, talked to them, dealt with them. Now his father Laomedon was killed by Hercules for not keeping his word, and ultimately he was a mortal that was a king that was so proud of himself. His ego got involved. His ego got in the way, and he went against the gods. He didn't pay him what he said. He didn't do what he said he's going to do to the gods. They got mad at him and killed him. Hercules did it. Okay, we're going to go to the next one. Okay. Of the statue of Apollo at Cuma, whose tears are supposed to have portended disaster to the Greeks, whom the god was unable to secure. That's another, it's mentioning the same thing we were reading before. This is page 175, though. And so I'm going to tell you the page numbers if you want to look. So we're on page 175, and it's saying, of the statue of Apollo at Cuma, whose tears are supposed to have portended disaster for the Greeks, that is Apollo dying. So understand that the tears of Apollo is he couldn't protect Troy, and he was destroyed himself. So Apollo was only left in the collective of men as alive, as a spirit that was in men. But Apollo himself was dead. There was no god body anymore, no godhead alive. So that's what I'm telling you it's describing. Now, this is St. Augustine, who lived in the time Rome fell. He was a saint, a Catholic saint of the Catholic Church, a very, very popular one. Now we're going to read where it says Apollo here again. It says, to have greater professional skill, and they pronounced that the weeping of Apollo's image was propitious to the Romans, became Cuma was a Greek colony, and that Apollo was bewailing and therefore presaging the grief and the calamity that was about to light upon his own land of Greece, so from which he had been brought. So ultimately, Apollo is dead. That's why he was bewailing. Apollo, it says, to the Romans, because Cuma was a Greek colony, and that Apollo was bewailing and thereby presaging the grief and calamity. So what was the grief and calamity? Troy fell. Apollo fell. So understand that Troy didn't fall if Apollo didn't fall. Apollo was not going to let Troy fall. So Troy was sacked because Apollo fell. So Apollo was destroyed. And ultimately, he was still alive. His spirit was still alive in men who had him. It was a living spirit. But the Godhead was destroyed. That was a calamity. That was an absolute catastrophe. It was the grief of the God. He was grieving and crying and in men, disturbed now. He'd been removed. Okay, it says right here, of the statue of Apollo at Cuma, his tears are saying it again. It's saying the same thing. Of the statue of Apollo at Cuma, whose tears are supposed to have portended disaster to the Greeks, whom the god was unable to succor. So he couldn't help the Greeks, or he wouldn't help the Greeks, basically, because he's dead. His Godhead was dead. He was alive in people only, and they're powerless. He became not immortalized. He became mortalized. He became immortal only. His immortality was lost. 189. It's talking about soothsaying God would securely await the issue, and then what frightful massacres of both armies ensued. Pyrrhus remained conqueror and would have been able now to proclaim Apollo a true diviner, as he understood the oracle, had not the Romans been the conquerors in the next engagement. And while such disastrous wars were being waged, a terrible disease broke out among the women, for the pregnant women died before delivery. I fancy excused himself in this matter on the ground that he professed to be arch-physician, not midwife. Cattle too similarly perished, so that it was believed that the whole race of animals was designed to become extinct. So what this is talking about is Apollo became a true diviner or a soothsayer in men his spirit lost its immortality. It lost its God status. And okay, so let's go to the next one. 236. It says, driving away enemies, the goddess Pelonia, for the sick as the physician, either Apollo or Asclepius, who was his son, who was known to raise the dead. He got killed by Zeus for raising the dead, which pissed Apollo off. It's also why he might end up dead. Asclepius, or both together, if there should be great danger, neither should the god Spinesis be entreated that he might root out the thorns from the fields, nor the goddess that the mildew might not come. So what they're saying is that the Apollo is the physician, the one who cures you of your disease, or he's the disease itself. He's the one who causes the plague. He's the plague itself. The women became sick only. It's because of his anger towards the women of Troy and the collective. So understand that Apollo is really mad at Minerva and really mad at the divine feminine collective. And I'll tell you why. Because understand that the mentality of the Trojan women were similar to inviting a man to come to a party and telling him, giving him a letter or message, having a messenger give him a letter to go to his house to deliver it. And it says, you're cordially invited to our ball and our party, and we honor you and want you to come as our guest and spend a day here. And we're going to have festivals and a party, and you'll be honored too. And ultimately there's a treasure that we have and we want to share with you. So come to our party. So the guy, some guy or king somewhere who got this message with his sons would come to the party thinking he's coming to a party because these women of Troy are actually invited him officially and formally. And ultimately he's happy. He's with his sons. He's coming to Troy and he goes to the party and he knocks on the door and they invite him in like guests. Oh, hi. Oh, nice. I'm glad you came. And oh, I like your clothes, and come sit down and have a drink. And it's poison. And ultimately the drinks are poison. And ultimately that when they drink the poison and they start to get sick, then they stab them with daggers. Like 10 women jump on the boys, the sons, stab the shit out of them, and then stab the father, kill him, and stab him in the eyes. They rip his eyes out. And I'm not kidding. The behavior of the Trojan women came from Minerva. Minerva was, now we're not going to talk trash about Minerva. Minerva was an awesome, powerful goddess that had a point, but she hated Trojan bloodline. She wanted to kill all the Trojans. She hated the Trojan bloodline, and that pissed Apollo off. So Apollo hated Minerva for what she did, and what she did was hate the Trojan bloodline and want to kill it. Apollo was trying to protect it, and he really wanted to protect it. So Apollo lost big time. Let's go to the next one. Different from that in which he moves about the stage for the amusement of spectators is not Saturn old and Apollo young in the shrines where their images stand, as well as when represented by actors' masks. So actors' masks means taking Apollo's spirit when Apollo the god is dead, but he's still alive in you. You still have a spirit. It's living in you now. So Apollo was made to be immortal. He was not immortal, but mortal, meaning Apollo is no longer immortal in a god body somewhere walking around. He is only now alive in the collective, in the spirit of men. So he's a living entity that's alive with no body, but it gets into men. So men have bodies that are not Apollo, but they get Apollo's spirit into them, and it's alive. But it's in a sense Apollo. Now, if you look at all the Apollo hairs, we can switch to Minerva. I'm going to type in Minerva here. Now understand, this is St. Augustine talking about the same thing I'm talking about. So understand that I'm talking about Minerva. We're searching for Minerva now, and we're going to go to page 69, and Minerva is talking about Diomedes. It's talking about for when all the statues were overthrown and burnt together with the town, Livy tells us that only the image of Minerva is said to have been found standing uninjured. amidst the ruins of her temple, not that it might be said in their praise, the gods who made the realm divine, but that it might not be said in their defense, they are gone from each other in vain. So Minerva's statue supposedly was standing still. The only thing is standing in a complete disaster. But Minerva was dead. She died. She was killed by Zeus. Lightning bolt killed her, and her goddess body was destroyed. So there was actually an immortal goddess body that was a physical person. It was called Minerva. She had a physical body. It had ichor, golden blood in it. It wasn't iron. Understand that our blood is made to rust. So you might think it's funny to think that red color rust, our red blood, our iron content in our blood is rust. It's already a rust. So our blood breaks down fast. It's also is made to develop. But understand that whoever created humans created them to die in a time period. He made the body so it would biologically break down on purpose. So we're we're given a lifespan, and it's under 120 years. It's usually around 70 years, but 70 to 80 years. But it's supposed to be up to 120 years, and it won't go past 120 years because we're biologically programmed to utterly shrivel up. If you're 120 years old, your cells will do what they're supposed to do and turn into mushrooms, dried up mushrooms. So basically, your body would just shrivel up into a mushroom, dead. That would be 120 years. But we only live to be 70. That's something's wrong with that. Meaning we should be living longer than 70. We should be living to 100, 120. But for some reason, we're only living to 70 to 80. There's a problem. Will someone say that when Fimbria stormed Troy, the gods were already resident in Rome? How then did the image of Minerva remain standing? Besides it, if they were at Rome when Fimbria destroyed Troy, perhaps they were at Troy when Rome itself was taken. Now, what they're talking about there is Minerva's not standing; she's dead. But ultimately, they're talking about how could her statue be still standing? That indicates she's not dead. So ultimately, Zeus killed Minerva and left her statue standing as the only thing there, which means people would find that everything was destroyed. All of those gods' statues were ripped down, torn down, every one of them. And ultimately, Minerva was still standing there. The statue of Minerva was still the only thing there and ultimately still standing. And she was destroyed. And that's why she was still standing. Zeus did that as a token of his appreciation for killing his own daughter. But ultimately, he didn't kill her. He killed her goddess body, and now she's still in humans, still alive. Her spirit goes into the collective of women and even some men. And so Minerva's still alive in humans, but she's been made to be a mortal person that gets into us. We take her or not. She's got Mars. I'm aware of the charges and you too. That's it. All right. See you in the next one. Thanks.